Harper Weston's voice sliced through the Ryman auditorium like a blade cutting silk. "You there, the man in the janitor's uniform at the back. Come up here. Now!" 500 guests turned their heads in perfect unison. On the live stream, 2 million people suddenly stopped scrolling and stared straight into this moment. Marcus Brennan stood frozen, his hands trembling, the thing that made him look most out of place at that exact second being the pair of yellow rubber gloves still gripping a cleaning rag. He'd finished wiping down the stage exactly 10 minutes earlier, right on schedule, the way he always did. Invisible, professional, gone before anyone noticed. But Harper noticed. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't think..." The words died before they could form a defense. Harper cut through them the way she cut through everything else that didn't fit her script. She moved across the stage with the kind of confidence that only comes from owning every room you enter. Grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and dragged him straight into the center of the stage lights, as if pulling an object onto a table for display. Her fingers pressed into his work shirt hard enough to communicate control without causing visible pain. "Let everyone see," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that made your teeth ache. "Whether you can actually sing or whether you're just taking up space here." Then Harper turned to the band and snapped her fingers with the sharp precision of someone issuing an order to a waiter who'd forgotten her drink. "Play Higher Ground for him." She curled her lips into a smirk that had been photographed 1,000 times for magazine covers. An impossibly high note, the same note that once earned me $2 million. Just as the band was about to come in, Harper leaned in close to Marcus. She switched off her own microphone with a practiced flick of her thumb, but Marcus's mic was still live, still broadcasting. Her voice dropped to a whisper that the entire auditorium and all 2 million viewers heard perfectly crystalline and clear. "Fail quietly, kid." The air in the room froze solid. Every person in the auditorium held their breath, waiting for something to shatter. Marcus stood there under lights blazing like fire, with hundreds of eyes in front of him, and a world behind him passing judgment through screens they held in their hands like modern-day tribunals. But what he did next wouldn't just prove Harper Weston wrong. It could also bring down everything she had built on lies. The question hanging in the air was simple and devastating. Why was Harper so determined to drag a janitor onto the stage to humiliate him in front of millions? What was she afraid of? Afraid enough to do this in public in front of cameras with nowhere to hide if it went wrong. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, why the next 10 minutes would explode across every screen in America within 24 hours, you needed to rewind time. 4 hours earlier, and then 5 years before that. 4 hours earlier, Marcus Brennan was not always a man who cleaned floors. He stood in the wings of the Ryman Auditorium at 4:30 in the afternoon, holding a bottle of glass cleaner in one hand and watching the rehearsal for the Voices for Hope charity gala. The event had a noble purpose, at least on paper, raising funds for Vanderbilt Children's Hospital and its congenital heart treatment program. 500 tickets at $500 each meant $250,000 flowing through this building tonight. The math was simple. The irony was crushing. Because among the children whose faces would appear on the giant screen behind the stage, children with damaged hearts, children who needed miracles that cost money, was Lily. His Lily. 6 years old, ventricular septal defect, a hole in her heart that wouldn't close on its own. He'd signed the consent forms allowing the hospital to use her image. Had even felt a strange kind of pride knowing his daughter's face might inspire someone to write a bigger check. Now he just felt sick. The band played the opening chords of Higher Ground, Harper's signature song, the one that made her famous 12 years ago. Her voice rang out powerfully in the lower sections, solid and controlled, exactly what you'd expect from a star who'd sold 4.2 million albums and won 2 Grammy Awards. But when the song reached the bridge, when the melody began its climb E5, then A5, heading straight toward that legendary C6, Marcus felt something shift in the air. Harper's neck tightened. Her shoulders lifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, the kind of tell that only someone who'd studied vocal technique for years would catch. When she tried to reach the C6, her voice cracked at A-sharp 5, nearly a tone and a half below the target note. The sound splintered in the empty auditorium like glass hitting concrete. Harper cleared her throat softly, quickly covering the mistake with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "My throat's too dry." She took a careful sip from a water bottle that had been placed on the monitor at the exact spot her assistant knew she'd need it. Then she turned to the sound technician sitting at the massive mixing board and said in a lowered voice that carried just far enough for Marcus to hear, "Turn up the backing track louder. I need support." The technician adjusted the settings without comment, without question, the way employees do when they've learned not to push back. Harper sang the passage again. This time the high note rang out perfectly, too perfectly. The kind of perfect that made Marcus's trained ear freeze in recognition. He'd spent 5 years working construction sites and washing dishes and scrubbing floors, but before that he'd spent his entire life studying music. Perfect pitch wasn't something you learned. It was something you were born with and then refined until you could distinguish between frequencies the way other people distinguished between colors. And Marcus could hear the faint metallic sheen of digital sound, could hear how the note sat on top of the harmony rather than blending into it the way a human voice would. That C6 didn't come from Harper Weston. It came from the speakers. The memory hit him like a fist to the sternum. 5 years earlier, Harper sitting on a television soundstage under bright lights, her face composed in that same expression of wounded dignity she wore so well. The host had asked her about Marcus Brennan, the contestant who'd walked away from the Voice of Tomorrow finale without explanation. And Harper had delivered her verdict with the cold precision of a judge reading a sentence. "Anyone who doesn't respect an opportunity doesn't deserve a dream." That single sentence had ended his career before it could begin. No record label would touch him after that. No stage would invite him to sing. The doors had closed so quickly and so completely that by the time Grace died 3 days later, by the time Lily was born, premature and struggling to breathe, Marcus had already understood that his old life was over. He returned to the janitor's closet, a windowless room that smelled of industrial cleaning solution and floor wax, and pulled out his phone. His hands shook slightly as he typed search terms into the browser. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for, a small article published last year buried in the local news section where most people would never see it. Only 15% of funds from Voices for Hope reach hospital. The remaining 85% was listed as administrative expenses, production costs, marketing for Harper's personal brand, management fees that flowed back to her own company. $250,000 raised tonight, and only about $37,000 would actually reach the children who needed it. Children like Lily, who needed $85,000 for surgery that insurance would only cover 40% of, leaving Marcus to somehow find $45,000 in 2 weeks or watch his daughter's condition deteriorate past the point of no return. He stood there in that closet, surrounded by mops and industrial chemicals, and asked himself, who would believe a cleaning man standing up against a singer who had sold millions of records? Then he thought of Lily watching the live stream from her hospital bed, believing that Harper Weston was a good person, believing that this gala truly helped children like her. Marcus opened his phone again and made a decision. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he couldn't let Harper keep lying for even one more second. 5 years earlier, Marcus Brennan stood backstage at the Voice of Tomorrow finale 30 minutes before he was supposed to step into the lights and change his life forever. He'd made it through 12 weeks of competition, surviving elimination after elimination, his voice carrying him past contestants who had bigger names, better connections, more experience. The judges had called him the ace card of Season 9. Harper Weston herself, sitting in the center judge's chair with her trademark red lipstick and diamond earrings, had told America, "Marcus has something special, the ability to make impossibly high notes sound effortless." His phone vibrated in his pocket. He almost didn't answer it. They'd been told repeatedly not to take calls this close to showtime, but something made him pull it out and look at the screen. St. Francis Hospital Emergency Department. The world tilted sideways. Grace's voice on the other end was barely audible, speaking through an oxygen mask, each word costing her something she couldn't afford to spend. "Marcus, I'm sorry, I tried to wait." Acute pneumonia, critical condition. The doctors were saying words like septic shock and multi-organ failure, and the next few hours will tell us everything. Marcus stood there with the phone pressed against his ear, hearing his wife struggle to breathe while behind him the production assistants were calling his name, telling him he had 20 minutes, telling him to get to makeup, telling him this was his moment. In front of him were the lights and the cameras and the millions of viewers and the recording contract that the winner would sign, the opportunity he'd been chasing his entire life. Behind him on the other end of a phone call was the woman he loved dying. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission, didn't explain. Marcus left the show that very night and ran straight to the hospital, still wearing his stage outfit, still carrying the dreams that had gotten him this far. By the time he reached Grace's bedside, she was unconscious. He held her hand and sang softly, sang, "You are my sunshine," the way he always did, but this time, she didn't squeeze his fingers or whisper that his voice made everything better. The public turned on him almost instantly. Social media exploded with accusations: irresponsible, unprofessional, threw away the opportunity of a lifetime. But it was Harper's statement that cut deepest, delivered the next morning on Good Morning America, with the cameras catching every perfectly composed angle of her face. The host asked what she thought about Marcus's departure, and Harper had looked directly into the lens and said, "Anyone who doesn't respect an opportunity doesn't deserve a dream." The sentence landed like a guillotine blade. Within 48 hours, every door in the music industry had slammed shut. Record labels that had been interested suddenly stopped, returning calls. Venues that had been discussing booking him went silent. The message was clear: Harper Weston had spoken, and in Nashville, Harper's word was law. 3 days after Marcus left the show, Grace passed away. He was holding her hand when it happened, sitting in a plastic hospital chair that hurt his back, watching machines that had been fighting to keep her alive finally go quiet. Their daughter Lily was born 6 hours later. 32 weeks gestational age, weighing only 3 pounds 2 ounces, with a hole in her heart that the doctors said would require surgery eventually, but that they couldn't fix yet because she was too small, too fragile, too close to not making it at all. Marcus was blacklisted from the entertainment industry. No record label would sign him. No stage would invite him to perform. He worked construction for a while, then got a job washing dishes at a restaurant on Broadway. Then finally landed the overnight janitorial position at the Ryman, because at least it was a building where music still happened, even if he was only there to clean up after other people's dreams. Now 5 years later, he and Lily lived in East Nashville in an old 2-bedroom apartment where the heating system only worked in one room and the security gate had been broken for 8 months. Marcus worked 2 shifts mornings, cleaning the Ryman, nights washing dishes, and slept less than 4 hours between them. Lily needed surgery within 2 weeks. The doctors had stopped saying eventually and started saying urgently. $85,000 total. Insurance covered 40%. Marcus needed 45,000 or his daughter wouldn't see her 7th birthday. But there was one thing Marcus never gave up. Every night he sang Lily to sleep with You Are My Sunshine, Grace's favorite song. He sang very softly, very carefully, as if singing just a little louder would cause the memories of Grace to crash down and crush him. Lily would whisper in the darkness, Daddy's voice makes my heart feel better. The ICU nurses had noticed it too. Lily's heart rate became noticeably more stable whenever she heard Marcus sing. No one could explain why, but Marcus knew. It wasn't technique, it wasn't pitch. It wasn't a miracle, it was love, the only thing he still had left to give his daughter. Tonight that voice, the one Harper Sterling had tried to bury 5 years ago, was about to become the weapon that brought her empire crashing down. The gala begins. 7 o'clock. The Voices for Hope. Gala began with the kind of polished precision that only serious money could buy. Marcus had finished his evening shift and put away his cleaning tools, preparing to leave through the back service entrance the way he always did. But something made him stop at the wings, standing in the shadows where the stage lights didn't quite reach watching. Harper appeared center stage in a shimmering, sequined gown that caught the lights and threw them back in 1,000 directions, making her look like something not quite human. 500 guests filled the auditorium, corporate sponsors, music industry executives, socialites who paid $500 for a ticket the way other people bought coffee. The cameras for the live stream were positioned at perfect angles, capturing everything. Harper's opening speech hit every emotional note with the practiced ease of someone who'd given this performance many times before. Tonight isn't just about music, it's about hope, about giving these children a chance to fight. The audience erupted in applause exactly when they were supposed to. The cameras swept to the giant screen behind the stage, and images of children with heart disease appeared one after another, each face accompanied by a name and diagnosis rendered in tasteful typography. Among them was Lily Reed, age 6, ventricular septal defect. Marcus stared at his daughter's face, projected 20 feet high. Her smile frozen in that photograph the hospital social worker had taken 3 months ago. Harper's voice washed over the audience. Every ticket, every donated dollar will go directly to help these little hearts. The lie came out so smoothly that if Marcus hadn't researched the numbers, hadn't seen the evidence that only 15% would actually reach the children, he might have believed it himself. Harper sang the first 3 songs. Her voice was good, well-trained, polished, precise, professional. But nothing special. Nothing that justified the legend she'd built around herself. Just competent performance from someone who'd had excellent teachers and expensive coaching. Then Harper introduced the next song, her smile widening with confidence that bordered on arrogance. Higher Ground. This song is proof that when you believe in yourself, you can reach unimaginable heights. The final note, C6, has never been reached by any singer other than me live on stage. That's why I stand here tonight. That's why I'm able to help these children. The band came in. Harper began to sing, just like Marcus had heard during rehearsal. When the song moved toward its climax, toward that impossible C6 note, the sound rang out perfect and clean and flawless. But Marcus's trained ear heard what no one else in the auditorium could hear. The faint metallic sheen of digital playback, the way the note sat on top of the instrumentation instead of weaving through it, the subtle difference between a human voice and sound coming from speakers. Marcus stepped out of the shadows of the wings. He had no plan, no script, no idea what he was going to say or do. Just a man who had been silent for 5 years, making a decision born from desperation and righteousness in equal measure. Harper saw him. Her eyes narrowed slightly, recognition flickering across her face. The former contestant, The man who had abandoned the show 5 years earlier. The one who had thrown away his chance and then disappeared into the kind of obscurity that successful people used as cautionary tales. A cold smile slowly spread across Harper's lips. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the applause with surgical precision. "We have a special guest tonight." The lights snapped around to Marcus. 500 heads turned in unison. The camera zoomed in and suddenly 2 million people were looking at a man in a janitor's uniform with yellow rubber gloves still on his hands and a cleaning cloth draped over his shoulder. "Marcus Brennan," Harper introduced him, letting his name hang in the air like an accusation. "Some of you may remember him from Voice of Tomorrow 5 years ago." She paused deliberately, letting the silence build. A true talent, a true potential. Another pause, and this time the word potential carried all the weight of what could have been and wasn't. Until he walked away right before the finale. No explanation, no apology. He simply disappeared. The audience began to murmur. Marcus's voice came out rough, raw, loud enough for people near the stage to hear. "My wife was dying." Harper either didn't hear or pretended not to. "And now look at him," she said with a smile that had ice beneath its surface. Cleaning up after successful people, how touching. A few cold laughs rippled through the hall. Blood rushed to Marcus's face, but he didn't tremble. He'd survived worse than public humiliation. He'd survived watching Grace die. He'd survived 5 years of poverty and shame. He could survive this. "Come up here, Marcus," Harper said, her voice carrying the false warmth of a host welcoming a guest. "Sing for us." Every instinct Marcus possessed screamed at him to leave, to get out, to go back to Lily at the hospital where she was watching this live stream from her bed. But if he turned away now, Harper would win. She would keep lying, keep making money off sick children, and one day Lily would grow up and watch this video and think her father was a coward who ran when it mattered most. Marcus stepped onto the stage. Each step felt like it weighed a ton. Like he was walking through water that got deeper with every movement. He stood under the lights and Harper handed him the microphone with a gesture that looked generous to the cameras but felt like mockery up close. "Make yourself comfortable," she said. "Just do your best." Before the band could play a single note, Marcus spoke. His voice came out steadier than he expected, carried by the microphone to every corner of the auditorium. "Miss Weston, I have a question." Harper raised an eyebrow, her smile still fixed in place. "Oh, go ahead." The question that came out of Marcus's mouth changed everything. "Could you turn off the backing track?" The air in the auditorium froze solid. Harper's smile stayed exactly where it was, but something shifted in her eyes. "The track is part of the arrangement, Marcus. But during rehearsal you sang without it." Marcus kept his voice quiet, factual, the way you'd state something everyone already knew. "You sang alone." The murmuring in the audience spread faster now, whispers building on whispers. Harper's voice tightened just slightly, enough that people in the front rows could hear the change in tone. "Sound check is different from a performance." "Then could you sing first?" Marcus continued, and even he wasn't sure where the words were coming from. What reservoir of courage or foolishness was pushing them out? "Just you know track, so I can learn how you do it." 3 seconds of absolute silence followed. Then Harper let out a sharp laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "You want me to audition in front of you?" "No," Marcus replied, and his voice was quieter now, but somehow more powerful because of it. "I just want to know whether you can actually sing." The auditorium exploded. Gasps and shocked laughter and the sound of 500 people suddenly realizing they might be witnessing something they'd talk about for years. Harper stared at Marcus as if he'd just slapped her across the face in front of her family. "Of course I can sing," she said through teeth that barely moved. I've been doing it for 15 years. Marcus held her gaze and spoke the words that would end one of their careers. Then prove it. Harper spun toward the sound technician sitting at the mixing board 30 feet away. Turn off the track, she snapped. All of it. The technician hesitated, his hand hovering over the controls. Harper's voice cracked like a whip. Do it! He pressed the button. The music that had been full and lush suddenly became sparse and bare, nothing but drums and bass and guitar with nowhere for a voice to hide. Harper Weston raised the microphone and began to sing. At first it was powerful, confident. She moved through the opening lines with the ease of years of training, every breath perfectly controlled. The audience gradually began to relax. Maybe the janitor had been mistaken. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding that would end with apologies and everyone going home to forget it happened. But then the song entered the bridge. The melody began to climb E4, G4, B4, and Harper's voice kept up, still steady, still controlled. Yet as the pitch continued to rise, something started to change. Her neck tightened. Her shoulders lifted slightly. D5, E5, A5. The sound was still there, but it was no longer light, no longer natural, no longer the effortless perfection her recordings had promised. Then Harper reached for the C6. Her voice broke. The sound shattered at A#5, nearly a tone and a half below the target, splintering in the air like glass hitting a tile floor. Harper stopped abruptly. She cleared her throat softly, quickly covering the mistake with a strained smile. Sorry, my throat is a bit dry. She took a careful sip of water, her hands steady even if her voice wasn't. That's why people use tracks to protect the voice during long shows. But Marcus had heard enough. Everyone in the auditorium had heard enough. You can't sing it, Marcus said. The words came out very quietly, but the microphone picked up everything, broadcast it to 500 people in the room and 2 million watching online. Harper spun around and her smile was now nothing more than a thin, icy line. I said my voice is tired. But on your album you sing that note 27 times. Marcus cut in, his voice growing stronger with each word. I counted, and in every live performance video online you hit it perfectly, every single time. The audience began to stir more violently now. Phones were raised. People looked at one another with expressions that moved from confusion to understanding to something like anger. What exactly are you implying? Harper's voice sharpened like a blade being drawn. Marcus had perfect pitch. He'd been born with the ability to hear frequencies the way other people saw colors, and 5 years of silence hadn't dulled that gift. I can hear frequencies, he said, speaking directly to the cameras, now to the millions watching. The note on your album is 1046.5 Hz C6. The note you just sang is 932 Hz A#5. A voice called out from the seats. Is he right? Harper's face flushed red, but Marcus wasn't finished. The voice on the album doesn't sound like yours. It belongs to another woman. I checked the album credits. It clearly lists Autumn Hayes' additional vocals. The theater erupted. Journalists in the audience typed furiously on their phones. Audience members shouted questions that overlapped into chaos. The cameras abandoned their fixed angles, operators scrambling to capture every reaction, every moment of what was becoming the biggest scandal Nashville had seen in years. Harper strode toward Marcus, and the smile was completely gone now, replaced by something raw and desperate. You need to shut up. Now. Why? For the first time since stepping onto the stage, Marcus felt something other than fear. He felt the weight of 5 years lifting off his shoulders, felt the truth burning in his chest like fire. Because I'm telling the truth. Because you don't know what you're talking about. I know what I heard during rehearsal. Marcus looked straight out at the auditorium, into the camera lens, at the 2 million people who were watching history happen in real time. And I know what I'm hearing right now. That high note isn't yours. You've been lip-syncing for years. Before Harper could pull Marcus off the stage, before her security team could move, a voice rang out from the wings, clear and steady and impossible to ignore. Actually, he's right. The entire auditorium snapped around. Daniel Parker, Harper's sound engineer for the past 5 years, stepped into the light. His face was pale, but his eyes were steady with the kind of determination that comes from finally making a decision you've been avoiding for too long. I've been Harper's sound engineer for 5 years, Daniel said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. At every performance I played that backing track. She has never been able to sing that note live. Not once. Absolute silence fell like a heavy blanket, crushing the room. 500 people held their breath. 2 million viewers around the country stopped whatever they were doing and stared at their screens. Harper Weston stood frozen at center stage, her own sound engineer having just destroyed everything she'd built in front of the entire world. Ridiculous! Harper snapped, her voice trembling with something between rage and panic. You expect people to believe a janitor over me? I have 2 Grammy Awards. I've sold 2 million albums. Someone shouted from the audience. Then prove him wrong. Sing the note. Harper's face drained from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. I just sang it. Another voice replied, this one closer to the stage. No, you cracked. We heard it clearly. The crowd began to turn the way crowds do when they sense blood in the water. Harper looked at Marcus, and inside her chest something ugly and desperate began to twist. Fine, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze water. You think you're so smart? Then you sing. Right now. No preparation, no warm-up, no second chance. Marcus's hands trembled. This was the moment where he would either prove who he truly was or become exactly what Harper Weston had always called him, a quitter. A failure, someone who didn't deserve dreams. From the guest seating, an old but steady voice rang out, You've got this, Marcus. Marcus turned. Raymond Callahan, the 60-year-old head janitor who had worked at the Ryman for 30 years, was standing up. Ray clapped slowly, deliberately, the sound echoing in the tense silence. Sing the way you sing for Lily. Marcus closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, felt the air fill his lungs, his diaphragm open, every lesson and memory and pain settling deep into his bones. He opened his eyes and nodded to the band. Play Higher Ground, he said. No track. The music began for the second time that night, but everything was completely different now. Marcus began to sing. His voice was gentle, almost hesitant. The opening lines sat low, comfortably within range. He focused on the lyrics, on the story the song was telling. A few audience members exchanged glances. He sang well, solid, competent, but nothing extraordinary yet. Then came the pre-chorus. Marcus's voice opened up, power increasing without losing control. There was something raw in it, something honest, something Harper's polished performance had lacked. He wasn't performing. He was testifying. The melody continued to climb. D5, E5, F5. His voice followed effortlessly, light and clear, each note placed with precision, no sign of strain. Harper shifted slightly where she stood. Her jaw tightened. The bridge arrived, the place where Harper had failed. Marcus didn't hesitate. He transitioned registers smoothly from chest voice to head voice, seamless as flowing water. G5, A5, B5. The entire auditorium instinctively sat up straighter, leaning forward without realizing they were moving. Then Marcus reached for the C6. The sound burst out crystal clear. No break, no strain. No tricks, just a pure whistle register note ringing like a bell made of glass and light. He held it for 4 seconds. Perfect. Unbelievable. Someone in the front row actually gasped aloud. But Marcus wasn't done. He pushed higher. D6, E6, F6, a range that even Harper's backing track had never dared to touch. Marcus's face was calm, almost serene, as if he were walking through a place he had lived in his entire life. Then he brought the voice back down F6 to C6, C6, to A5, A5 to F5, every transition seamless, every note a small miracle that shouldn't have been possible but was happening right in front of them. He completed the bridge and moved into the final chorus. His voice was completely open now, no hiding, no fear, nothing held back. When the final word faded into silence, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the theater exploded. 500 people leaped to their feet, shouting, applauding, faces streaked with tears they didn't try to hide. Ray jumped up and down, both arms raised like a boxing coach, watching his fighter win the championship. The entire band stood clapping non-stop. The live stream went wild. Within 30 seconds, 50,000 shares. Within a minute, the name Marcus Brennan shot straight to the top of global trending lists. Marcus stood under the lights, breathing hard, barely able to believe what had just happened. Harper Weston looked like she'd been knocked flat, all the color drained from her face, all the confidence stripped away to reveal something small and frightened underneath. From the front row, a woman stood up. Yolanda Carter, an R&B legend, a special guest at the gala, was crying openly. "That is the best thing I've ever heard from a janitor in my entire career," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Marcus, you didn't just hit that note, you owned it." The applause grew even louder. Trevor Hudson, a producer who had worked with Alicia Keys and Kendrick Lamar, shook his head slowly and stood up. "I need to say this," he announced. "I've been in this industry for 30 years, and tonight we just witnessed a janitor sing a note that the woman who made it famous truly cannot." The auditorium fell dead silent. The weight of his words pressed down on everyone. Trevor turned to face the audience, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "The album recording, I was the mixer. I was there. Marcus is right. That is not Harper's voice." It's Autumn Hayes, a studio singer from Austin. She was paid $2,000 and forced to sign an NDA. She was never properly credited. Harper opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Trevor continued, and there was something like shame in his voice now, the kind that comes from years of compromise finally breaking into confession. "I stayed silent because that's what people do in this industry, protect the star, protect the money. But I'm done protecting lies, especially when a janitor has had more courage than I have for 3 decades. The theater erupted again. Journalists typed furiously. Cameras rushed toward the stage. Harper finally found her voice, and it came out as a scream. "This is insane. You're going to destroy my career over a backing track. Everyone uses tracks. Beyoncé uses tracks." Yolanda shot back immediately, her voice cutting through the chaos. "But they don't claim to be singing live. They don't sell tickets for live performances in lip sync." "That's fraud, Harper." Harper stammered, looking around desperately for support from her manager, from her team, from anyone who might still believe her. But the band had turned away. Her manager was on his phone, probably calling lawyers. The audience had already decided. Harper turned to Marcus one final time. In that moment, he saw in her eyes not just anger, but fear, raw, genuine terror of losing everything. "You'll regret this," she whispered, just loud enough for the microphone to catch. "You, your little family, your sick daughter. I promise you'll never work in this industry again. Never." The threat hung in the air, recorded by every camera broadcast to millions. But Marcus was no longer afraid. For the first time in 5 years, he felt free. Marcus spoke, and his voice was steady, clear, unshakable. "I don't work in this industry. I sing because I love it, and you can't take that from me." He paused for one beat, then added slowly, clearly, looking directly at Harper. "But maybe it's time someone took it from you." The theater fell completely silent. Then a single clap echoed slow, deliberate. Then another. Within seconds, all 500 people rose to their feet, applauding not for Harper Weston, but for a father who refused to lie. Harper looked around into the cameras at the wreckage of everything she had built, and there was nothing left to say. She turned and walked off the stage. The moment her foot crossed into the wings, the theater erupted again. People were glued to their phones. The live stream chat scrolled so fast it was unreadable. Someone shouted, "Check Twitter, she's trending. Not Marcus Brennan. Harper Weston exposed. Harper Weston cheated. Harper Weston's career is over." Everything happened at a dizzying speed. Within 5 minutes, Harper's Wikipedia page was being edited. 10 minutes later, major music blogs posted headlines, "Famous singer exposed by janitor live on stage." 15 minutes after that, 3 major sponsors released statements saying they were reconsidering their partnerships. Marcus remained standing on the stage, surrounded by the chaos he had caused simply by telling the truth. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel victorious. Just a quiet certainty that he had done the right thing, even if he had no idea what would come next. The chaos lasted nearly 20 minutes before security began clearing the auditorium. Marcus sat backstage on a folding chair. Ray sat beside him, refusing to leave. Around them, adults whispered urgently, event organizers, Harper's management team, people in expensive suits speaking rapidly into phones. No one spoke to Marcus directly. His phone vibrated. A call from the hospital. Lily had watched the entire live stream from her hospital bed. "Daddy, I saw it. You sang so beautifully." Marcus's throat tightened. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "I'm okay, Daddy. The nurses watched too. They said you were amazing." That call had been an hour ago. Now it was nearly midnight. The children's choir had gone home. The theater was nearly empty, just crew members dismantling equipment. Marcus was still sitting on that folding chair. Ray was still there, refusing to leave him alone. Then a woman appeared. She looked to be in her early 50s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than 6 months of Marcus's salary. Leather briefcase in hand, a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Catherine Ross. I represent Miss Weston." She pulled up a chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." Ray stood up immediately, positioning himself close. "He doesn't have a lawyer present. If this is a legal discussion, I suggest representation." "Of course," Catherine replied smoothly. "I'm not here for formal negotiations, just to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding." Marcus's voice came out low and steady, the voice of a man who had endured too much loss to be easily intimidated. "There is no misunderstanding. Your client cannot sing the notes that made her famous. That is fraud." Catherine's smile didn't waver. "The music industry is complex, Mr. Brennan. Artists use vocal support, backing tracks, studio techniques. That's standard practice. Tonight was merely a misunderstanding of professional context." "I understand that she lied." Catherine turned toward him, and for just a moment the professional mask slipped enough to show the calculation underneath. "No, you misunderstand. And that misunderstanding is causing significant harm to Miss Weston. Sponsors are threatening to withdraw. The tour is in jeopardy. Millions of dollars could be lost." The word harm hung in the air like a threat disguised as concern. Catherine opened her briefcase and placed a stack of documents on the table between them. "If you sign this, everything goes away." Marcus picked up the papers and read. His expression didn't change, but his hands tightened slightly on the edges of the document. The contract said he had made false accusations, that he apologized, that he was seeking attention, that he would never speak publicly about this matter again. "It's a mutual agreement," Catherine said, her voice as smooth as expensive whiskey. "In return, Miss Weston will not pursue legal action. and as a gesture of goodwill, she will fund a $100,000 music scholarship for you. Full coverage, any program you choose. She paused deliberately, letting the numbers sink in before delivering the second part. We're also aware your daughter needs surgery. We will cover the full $85,000. Marcus set the papers down carefully and looked directly at Catherine Ross. $185,000. Enough to save Lily. Enough to change his life. Enough to make every problem he had disappear like smoke. And if I don't sign... Catherine's smile faded by degrees like a light being dimmed. Miss Weston will pursue defamation charges against you, against anyone who spreads your statements, against the Ryman Auditorium for allowing a hostile environment. She paused. Your daughter's school district has also been informed that a $500,000 donation to its music program is now at risk. Ray clenched his fists but said nothing. This was Marcus's decision to make. Catherine concluded with the kind of finality that came from years of winning these kinds of negotiations. So Mr. Brennan, sign here, accept the scholarship, and everyone moves on. Or refuse and watch your family drown in legal fees you cannot afford. She looked him straight in the eye. The choice is yours. Marcus stared at the papers, at the lines of text that would label him a liar, at the signature line that would erase everything that had just happened. He thought of Lily lying in her hospital bed. Thought of $85,000. Thought of surgery in 2 weeks or never. Then he thought of the truth and of what it would teach his daughter if he sold it for money, no matter how desperately they needed that money. No, Marcus said. Catherine blinked. Excuse me. I'm not signing. I didn't lie. She did. And I won't say I lied just because she's rich and I'm not. Catherine's voice turned cold enough to freeze glass. Mr. Brennan, I don't think you fully understand the consequences. I understand you're threatening me. Go ahead and sue me if you want, but I'm not signing that paper. Catherine's face hardened into something like marble, beautiful and completely devoid of warmth. Then I'll see you in court. She gathered her briefcase with sharp, efficient movements. Before leaving, she turned back one last time. By tomorrow morning, there will be stories about you, about your family, private things, painful things, and when it all gets worse, which it will, remember that you chose this. Then she left. Ray didn't hug Marcus, didn't offer empty comfort. The two men simply stood side by side in silence. After a long moment, Ray spoke softly. You sure? Marcus nodded. I'm sure. That scholarship, the surgery money, I won't teach my daughter that truth can be bought with fear. His voice didn't shake. It was the voice of a father who had just made the hardest decision of his life. I chose family over career 5 years ago. People said I was wrong. But Grace, even as she was dying, said she was proud of me. For me, that's enough. Ray nodded slowly. Then we fight. We fight. The two men walked out into the cold Nashville night, men who had chosen truth over money, principle over survival, the right path over the easy one. Behind them, the Ryman Auditorium stood silent, holding the echo of a moment that would change everything. Ahead of them stretched an uncertain future filled with legal battles and financial ruin and threats they couldn't yet imagine. But for now, in this moment, Marcus Brennan felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. The weight of his own integrity, solid and real and worth more than any amount of money Harper Weston could offer. His phone vibrated one more time. Another unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Mr. Brennan, my name is Melissa Garrett. I'm an attorney and I'd like to represent you pro bono. Marcus stopped walking. Ray stopped beside him. The Nashville night stretched out around them, cold and clear, full of stars that seemed impossibly far away and impossibly bright. Why? Marcus asked. Because what you did was right, Melissa replied, and because my firm believes the legal system should not be used as a weapon for the wealthy to silence people who tell the truth. Marcus woke to the sound of his phone buzzing like an angry hornet swarm. 6 in the morning. He'd slept maybe 3 hours, his dreams filled with stage lights and Harper's frozen smile and the sound of his own voice reaching for notes that seemed impossible until they weren't. The phone screen showed thousands of notifications messages flooding in faster than he could process them. He opened Twitter first, and the initial image hit him like a physical blow. Someone had found their apartment building in East Nashville, the peeling paint visible in harsh daylight, the broken security gate hanging at an angle, trash bins overflowing near the entrance. The caption read, "This is where Marcus Brennan lives while he accuses Harper Weston of cheating." It's clear he's just desperately trying to escape poverty. Marcus's hands went numb. He scrolled further. Another post showed a photograph from 5 years ago, him accepting a free meal at a community kitchen after Grace's funeral when he'd had exactly $17 to his name and a newborn in the ICU. Living off handouts his whole life. This was never about the truth, it was about money. The comments underneath were brutal in their efficiency. Ungrateful. He should be thanking Harper for even acknowledging him. This is what happens when you give people like this a chance. People like this. The phrase sat in his stomach like spoiled food. By noon, the smear campaign had achieved full coordination. News websites began publishing articles that shared suspiciously similar language, as if they'd all received the same talking points from the same source. Sources close to the Brennan family claim Marcus planned the entire incident as an extortion scheme. No evidence provided, no verification attempted, just words printed as fact because someone with money had made a phone call. By afternoon, Harper's legal team made their move official. A courier delivered documents to the apartment, a $10 million defamation lawsuit filed not only against Marcus but against Autumn Hayes, the studio singer who hadn't even spoken publicly yet. Against Trevor Hudson, the producer who'd testified at the gala. Against Daniel Parker, the sound engineer who'd confirmed the backing tracks. Against anyone who had dared to tell the truth or might consider telling it in the future. Marcus held the legal papers in hands that shook so badly he could barely read the words. This wasn't a lawsuit meant to win in court. This was a weapon designed to terrorize, to crush anyone who opposed Harper Weston under the weight of legal fees they could never afford. Even if she lost every claim, the process itself would destroy them. But Harper's team wasn't finished. By 4 in the afternoon, new stories began appearing on entertainment news sites, the coordination so precise it felt choreographed. Sources close to Harper claim Marcus Brennan is a father with alcohol issues. His family has a history of violence. They are playing the victim to extract settlement money. None of it was true. Marcus had never touched alcohol in his life, had watched it destroy too many musicians he'd known to ever start. The closest thing to violence in his family was his grandfather's service in Korea, and that had ended before Marcus was born. But truth didn't matter when lies moved faster and sounded better. By 5 o'clock, another outlet ran with something even more vicious. Confirmed Lily Brennan doesn't actually have a heart condition. Medical records show the entire story was staged for sympathy. Marcus sat on the worn sofa in their apartment, his phone trembling in his grip, watching lies pile on top of each other like debris in a flood. The walls felt like they were closing in the air, getting thinner, the future narrowing to a single point of pressure that might crush him completely. Then at 7:15 that evening, something changed. A woman named Autumn Hayes posted a video to YouTube. She appeared to be in her mid-30s with dark blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, sitting in what looked like a professional recording studio. Gold records lined the wall behind her, someone else's achievements that she'd helped create but never got to claim. My name is Autumn Hayes. I am a studio singer. Her voice was steady, clear, the voice of someone who'd finally decided that fear had controlled her long enough. And I am the voice Harper Weston has been selling as her own for the past 12 years. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. The video had been posted 8 minutes earlier and already had 50,000 views. Autumn continued looking directly into the camera with the kind of directness that comes from burning every bridge behind you. That man, Marcus Brennan, told the truth last night. I sang the whistle register note in Higher Ground and 6 other songs on Harper's albums. I was paid $2,000 per song and forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement that threatened me with financial ruin if I ever spoke about it. She held up a stack of papers to the camera close enough that the legal letterhead was visible. This is my contract. These are the recording session logs. This is the proof. Her hands didn't shake, and I stayed silent while a janitor was being crushed for daring to expose something I was too afraid to say myself. That ends now. Within 1 hour, the video had 2 million views. Within 3 hours, 7 other studio singers came forward, each posting their own videos, their own contracts, their own stories of being paid poverty wages to create the voices that made other people rich and famous. Each one confirmed what Marcus had said. Each one proved that Harper Weston's entire career was built on a foundation of theft and lies. By noon the next day, public opinion had reversed so completely it felt like whiplash. The hashtag shifted from Harper Weston exposed to justice for Marcus Brennan. But Harper didn't withdraw the lawsuit. She escalated it. Her legal team filed an expanded complaint, now suing Autumn Hayes for $10 million for violating her NDA, suing the Ryman Auditorium for $5 million for creating a hostile work environment, suing anyone and everyone who had the audacity to speak truth to her power. The message was clear. We will bury you in legal costs until you have nothing left. That evening, Catherine Ross appeared at Marcus's apartment again. This time she didn't bother with pleasantries. Mr. Brennan, I'm here to make one final offer before this becomes truly ugly. Marcus stood in the doorway, not inviting her in. Ray had come over after work and stood behind him, silent support. There is no offer I'll accept. Catherine's smile was thin as paper. Miss Weston is prepared to cover all of Lily's medical expenses, the full $85,000 plus, establish a trust fund of $100,000 for her future care. In exchange, you sign a statement saying you were mistaken about what you heard, that you acted emotionally, and that you apologize for any harm caused to Miss Weston's reputation. Marcus felt the temptation like a physical thing, a hook in his chest, pulling toward safety, toward saving his daughter, toward making all the pain stop. $185,000. Lily's surgery, her future, everything he couldn't provide on his own. No. Catherine's expression hardened into something resembling contempt. You're choosing pride over your daughter's life. The words hit exactly where they were meant to, but Marcus had already made this decision once, and he wouldn't unmake it now. I'm choosing to teach my daughter that some things matter more than money, that truth matters, that you don't sell your integrity because someone threatens you. Then you're a fool. Catherine turned to leave, then stopped at the threshold. Tomorrow morning we're filing a motion to compel Lily's medical records. We're going to prove in court that you're either lying about her condition or exploiting a sick child for sympathy. Either way, the judge will see exactly what kind of father you are. She left before Marcus could respond, her heels clicking on the concrete walkway like a countdown timer. Ray spoke quietly into the silence that followed. She's bluffing. No judge would allow that. Maybe. Marcus closed the door, leaned against it. But the damage is already done. Just filing the motion puts it in the news, makes people question whether Lily is really sick. Then we prove she is. by showing them my daughter's medical records, by making her sickness into evidence. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. She's 6 years old, Ray. She shouldn't have to prove she's dying to make people believe her father isn't a liar. The next morning brought exactly what Catherine had promised. Headlines appeared across entertainment news. Harper Weston's lawyers question, is Marcus Brennan's daughter really sick? Social media erupted with speculation. Comment sections filled with people demanding Marcus release Lily's medical records to prove he wasn't exploiting her condition for money and attention. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands, wondering how far Harper would go, how much damage she was willing to inflict on a 6-year-old girl to protect her own lies. The answer he was learning was that there was no bottom to it, no line she wouldn't cross. His phone rang, a Nashville number he didn't recognize. He answered, expecting another rebooter or another threat. Mr. Brennan, this is Melissa Garrett. We spoke briefly last night. I'd like to meet with you today to discuss representation. 2 hours later, Melissa sat across from Marcus at his kitchen table, which was now covered with legal documents, news articles, and printouts of social media posts. She was 42, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun and the kind of direct eye contact that suggested she didn't waste time on games. Harper's lawsuit is garbage, she said without preamble. Defamation requires false statements. Everything you said was true. She knows it. This is intimidation, not litigation. So what do? We countersue. Fraud, false advertising, breach of contract with ticket buyers who paid to see a live performance and got lip sync instead. We turn this into a class action lawsuit and make it so expensive that she can't continue. Melissa spread documents across the table, her movements efficient and practiced. We've already started gathering evidence. Autumn Hayes has agreed to testify and provide all her contracts. Trevor Hudson is willing to give a deposition about the mixing sessions where Harper's real vocals were replaced. Daniel Parker will testify about the backing tracks he played at every show for 5 years. But the preliminary hearing is in 4 days, Marcus said. Can we be ready? We don't need to be ready for trial. We just need to prove enough doubt that the judge denies Harper's request for a gag order. Once we get past that, we move into discovery, where we can force Harper's team to produce evidence, depose witnesses, and build the real case. For the first time since Catherine Ross had walked into his life, Marcus felt something like hope stirring in his chest. You really think we can win? Melissa didn't sugarcoat it. Legally, yes, we have truth on our side, and that matters in court. But Harper has money and time. She can drag this out, exhaust you financially and emotionally. This won't be easy, and it won't be quick. How long? 6 months if we're lucky. A year or more if she really fights. Marcus thought of Lily in the hospital, of the surgery that couldn't wait 6 months or a year. I don't have that kind of time. I know. Melissa's expression softened slightly. But right now, fighting this lawsuit is the only way to protect yourself and your daughter from what Harper will do if she wins. If you sign her settlement, you're admitting you lied. That follows you forever. It destroys any chance you have of rebuilding your life. Marcus looked at the papers spread across his table, evidence of a battle he'd never wanted to fight but couldn't avoid now that it had found him. Okay, we do it. They spent the next hour going through strategy, discussing witnesses, planning for every move Harper's team might make. But in the back of Marcus's mind, a clock was ticking. Lily's surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks from now. The doctors had been clear waiting longer than that meant risking permanent damage. Risking her not making it through at all. The thought sat in his stomach like a stone. He could win the lawsuit and lose his daughter, or he could sign Harper's settlement, save Lily's life, and teach her that truth was negotiable when the price got high enough. That night, Marcus visited Lily at the hospital. She was in the pediatric cardiac unit, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping track of a heart that was trying so hard to work properly but couldn't without help. She was awake, watching a tablet propped on her adjustable bed table, her face pale but her eyes bright when she saw him. "Daddy." She reached for him and he took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV line taped to her arm. "Hey, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Tired, but the nurses let me watch videos of you singing. You were so good, Daddy." Marcus felt his throat close up. "Thanks, baby. Why are people saying mean things about you on the internet?" He should have known she'd seen something, that kids in hospital rooms with tablets and too much time found their way to things they shouldn't see. Because sometimes when you tell the truth, there are people who don't want to hear it. So they try to make you look bad to make themselves look better. Lily considered this with the seriousness that children sometimes brought to big concepts. "But you did tell the truth, right?" "I did." "Then the mean things don't matter." She said it with such simple certainty, as if the world actually worked that way. As if truth always won in the end. Just because it was true. Marcus wished he had her faith. "You're right, sweetheart. The mean things don't matter." "Daddy?" Her voice got smaller. "Am I going to get better?" The question hung between them like a live wire. Marcus could feel the weight of it, the fear underneath the thing they both knew but rarely spoke aloud. "Yes," he said, and he made it sound like a promise, even though it was really a prayer. "The doctors are going to fix your heart and you're going to get better." "Okay." She squeezed his hand with fingers that felt too small, too fragile. "Will you sing to me?" So Marcus sang right there in the hospital room, with machines beeping rhythm behind him. He sang "You Are My Sunshine" the way he always did, softly and carefully, pouring every ounce of love he had into words that Grace had sung first, that had been passed down to him, that he was now passing to Lily. The nurses in the hallway slowed their walking to listen. A doctor paused in the doorway, pretending to check a chart, but really just standing there for the music. When the song ended, Lily was asleep, her breathing steady and even. Marcus sat watching her for a long time, this small person who depended on him for everything, who believed he could fix anything, who had faith in a world that kept proving itself crueler than any child should have to understand. His phone buzzed. A text from Ray: "Check GoFundMe, now." Marcus opened the app and found what Ray had sent him. Someone he later learned it was Walt, the older janitor from the Ryman, had created a fundraising page titled "Help Marcus Brennan Save His Daughter." The goal was set at $45,000, the exact amount insurance wouldn't cover. The page had been live for 6 hours. It had raised $3,200. Every donation was small: $20 from a teacher in Ohio, $50 from a mechanic in Phoenix, $35 from a nurse in Seattle. Working people sending what they could afford, which wasn't much, but they were sending it anyway. The messages attached to the donations made Marcus's eyes burn. "Thank you for standing up for us. Working people take care of our own. You gave us our voice back. Now we give you ours." Marcus sat in that hospital room, watching his daughter sleep, reading messages from strangers who somehow understood that this fight was bigger than just him and Harper. That it was about everyone who'd ever been told. Their voice didn't matter. Their truth didn't count. Their lives were worth less than the comfort of the powerful. $3,000 wasn't enough. It wasn't close to enough. But it was a start. And it came from people who had as little as he did, who were giving anyway because they believed in something larger than self-interest. The next morning, Marcus woke to his phone ringing at 4:47 a.m. St. Jude Children's Hospital. His heart stopped before he even answered. "Mr. Brennan, you need to come immediately. Lily's in respiratory distress." Marcus ran, didn't change out of the t-shirt and sweatpants he'd slept in. Didn't grab his wallet or his keys, just ran to Ray's apartment and pounded on the door until the older man appeared, already pulling on his jacket. Because he could read panic in a knock. They made the 15-minute drive in 10, Ray pushing through yellow lights and stop signs with the kind of recklessness that came from understanding that nothing mattered except getting there in time. The pediatric ICU was on the 4th floor. Marcus took the stairs 3 at a time, burst through the double doors, found Lily's room by following the sound of machines alarming. Dr. Rachel Hayes, the cardiac surgeon who'd been overseeing Lily's care, was there with 3 nurses, everyone moving with controlled urgency around the small bed where Lily lay unconscious, an oxygen mask covering her face, her lips tinged faintly blue. Dr. Hayes pulled Marcus aside the moment the immediate crisis stabilized. Her face was grave in a way that made his stomach drop. "We've stabilized her for now, but Marcus, we need to operate sooner than planned, much sooner." "How soon?" "Days, maybe a week at most." She looked at him with eyes that had delivered bad news too many times to sugarcoat it. "Lily's heart is weakening faster than we anticipated. We're seeing signs of early heart failure. If we don't repair the defect soon, she's not going to make it." The floor dropped away. Marcus felt himself falling even though he was standing still. "But the insurance, we don't have the money yet." Dr. Hayes cut him off gently. "We will perform the surgery regardless of payment status. Your daughter's life is not contingent on your ability to pay." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But you need to understand what we're facing. Open heart surgery, 8 hours minimum, high risk even under the best circumstances. And there's a 15% chance of serious complications, infection, bleeding, stroke, arrhythmia. There's a 3 to 5% chance that Lily doesn't survive the surgery itself." Marcus couldn't breathe. The numbers crashed over him like waves. 15%, 3 to 5%, his 6-year-old daughter on a table with her chest open while surgeons tried to fix something that should have never been broken. "And without the surgery," Dr. Hayes met his eyes without flinching. "Without the surgery, Lily won't live to see her 7th birthday. I'd be surprised if she makes it 3 months." 3 in the morning. The hospital waiting room was empty except for Marcus and Ray. Lily was sedated, sleeping in the ICU under constant monitoring. There was nowhere else to go, nothing else to do except sit in plastic chairs bolted to the floor and wait for morning. Marcus held his phone in both hands, staring at Catherine Ross's number in his call history. 1 call. That's all it would take. Accept the deal, sign the papers, tell the world he'd been wrong, that he'd lied, that Harper Weston was the victim of his desperate attention-seeking. And in exchange, Lily gets her surgery. Lily lives. His finger hovered over the call button. The waiting room door opened. Lily stood there in her hospital gown, dragging her IV pole behind her barefoot on the cold tile floor. Marcus was up and moving before he could think, reaching her in 3 strides. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out of bed? I woke up and you weren't there." Her voice was small, frightened in a way that broke something in his chest. "Daddy, are you okay?" Marcus knelt down to her level, and that's when he realized his face was wet, that he'd been crying without knowing it. "I'm okay, baby. Daddy's okay." Lily looked at him with those eyes that saw too much, that had learned too young how to read adult face for signs of danger. "Why are people saying bad things about you?" He'd thought they'd already had this conversation, but apparently children needed to hear certain truths more than once before they could hold on to them in a world that kept trying to prove them wrong. Because sometimes when you tell the truth, there are people who want you to stay quiet. "But lying is bad. You always tell me lying is bad." "That's right. Then why do grown-ups lie so much?" Marcus took a breath, searching for words that were honest but wouldn't terrify her. "Because sometimes lying feels easier than being brave enough to tell the truth. It's scary to stand up and say something when powerful people want you to be quiet. Lily put her small hand on his cheek, a gesture she'd seen Grace do 1,000 times in the brief overlap of their lives. Daddy, are you scared? Very. But you still told the truth. Yes. Then that's brave. She said it with absolute certainty, the way children do before the world teaches them to doubt. Mom told me being brave means you're scared, but you still do the right thing. In that moment, Marcus understood that he'd already made his decision, that it had been made in the instant Lily walked through that door and looked at him with faith he couldn't betray. He couldn't call Catherine Ross, couldn't sign those papers, couldn't teach his daughter that the truth had a price tag, and when the cost got high enough, you sold it to the highest bidder. Your mom was the bravest person I ever knew, he whispered, and you're the second bravest. Lily shook her head seriously. No, you are. Marcus held her carefully, mindful of the IV and the wires and the fragile heart working too hard in her small chest. He'd thought he was protecting her, that every choice he made was about keeping her safe, giving her the best chance at life. But sitting there in that empty waiting room at 3 in the morning, he understood that she was protecting him too, that the strength was flowing both ways, that they were saving each other. He picked up his phone and deleted Catherine Ross's number. Whatever happened next, whatever price they had to pay, they would pay it with their integrity intact. Ray spoke quietly from his chair, the first words he'd said in hours. The GoFundMe is up to $18,000. It wasn't enough, still more than $25,000 short. But it was people like them, janitors and teachers and mechanics and nurses, giving what little they had because they believed in something larger than themselves. Then we keep fighting, Marcus said. The surgery was scheduled for 9 days away. Dr. Hayes had cleared her calendar, assembled her best team, prepared for every complication they could anticipate. The hospital had agreed to perform the procedure regardless of payment status. Though Marcus would owe whatever insurance didn't cover, would probably be paying it off for the rest of his life. But Lily would be alive, and that was the only math that mattered. In the meantime, Melissa Garrett was preparing for the preliminary hearing, where Harper would ask the judge to issue a gag order preventing Marcus from speaking publicly about anything related to the case. It was scheduled for 3 days before Lily's surgery, which meant Marcus would be fighting 2 battles simultaneously, one for his daughter's life, one for the truth that had already cost him everything except his integrity. He wondered in the quiet moments if integrity would be enough, if principles could protect Lily when her heart gave out, if standing up for what was right would matter when he was standing over a grave instead of a hospital bed. But then he looked at his daughter sleeping peacefully, because his voice made her heart feel better, and he knew he'd made the only choice he could live with. Some things mattered more than survival. Some things were worth dying for, and if the truth wasn't one of those things, then nothing was. The courtroom was smaller than Marcus had imagined. Davidson County Courthouse Room 4B held maybe 40 seats in the gallery, most filled with reporters who'd been camping outside since dawn. Harper Weston sat at the plaintiff's table, flanked by 5 attorneys in suits that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. She wore a navy blue jacket that photographed well, her face composed in that familiar expression of wounded dignity she'd perfected over years of public performance. Marcus sat at the defense table between Melissa Garrett and Ray, who'd insisted on coming for moral support even though he had no official role in the proceedings. Marcus wore the only dress shirt he owned, a white button-down that Ray had helped him iron that morning, because Marcus's hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to do it himself. This wasn't the full trial yet, just a preliminary hearing on Harper's motion for an injunction. A legal maneuver to silence Marcus Autumn Hayes, Trevor Hudson, and anyone else who might tell the truth before it could spread further. In plain language, make them shut up while Harper's lawyers built a case to bury them permanently. Judge Patricia Donovan entered a woman in her early 60s with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense expression that suggested she'd heard every legal argument worth hearing and wasn't impressed by expensive suits or celebrity status. She glanced at Harper's legal team, then looked at Marcus, and something flickered across her face too quickly to read, but not by accident. "Ms. Ross, you're seeking a gag order against a janitor." The judge's voice carried the faintest edge of skepticism. Catherine Ross stood with practiced grace. "Your Honor, the defendant's occupation doesn't diminish the harm caused by his false statements." "Are they false?" Judge Donovan interrupted. "Those statements were made with malicious intent to destroy my client's reputation, her livelihood. Those statements were made after your client publicly humiliated him on stage in front of 2 million viewers." The judge's tone remained neutral, but the observation landed like a stone in water. Melissa stood. "Your Honor, if the court permits, I'd like to present footage from the gala night. Unedited." Judge Donovan nodded. The bailiff dimmed the lights. The entire courtroom watched the screen as the video played Harper dragging Marcus onto the stage, the whispered threat caught by the open microphone, Harper's voice cracking at A-sharp 5 when she tried to hit the C6, Marcus's flawless performance that followed. When the lights came back up, the silence in the room felt heavy enough to crush bone. Melissa remained standing. "Your Honor, the plaintiff didn't summon this man to the stage because he lied. She summoned him because he was about to tell the truth. And that truth cost her money, cost her endorsements, cost her the carefully constructed image she'd been selling for 12 years. That is not defamation. That is consequence." Judge Donovan turned to Catherine. "Do you have any evidence that Mr. Brennan's statements are false?" Catherine hesitated, and in that hesitation, Marcus could see the entire case beginning to crack. "Your Honor, the music industry routinely uses vocal support and enhancement techniques as standard practice. I didn't ask about industry standards. I asked yes or no. We believe the context of my client's statements has been deliberately misunderstood to cause maximum damage. So that's a no." Judge Donovan made a note on the legal pad in front of her. "Ms. Garrett, do you have evidence supporting Mr. Brennan's statements?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Autumn Hayes to the stand." Autumn walked to the witness stand wearing a simple gray dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger and more vulnerable than she had in the video. She was sworn in, and Melissa guided her through testimony that felt less like a legal proceeding and more like a confession years in the making. "Ms. Hayes, what is your profession?" "I'm a studio session vocalist. I've worked in the industry for 15 years. Have you ever worked with Harper Weston?" Autumn's voice didn't waver. "Yes. For the past 12 years, I've been the voice behind her most famous songs. Higher Ground, Elevation, Zenith, Apex, Summit, all of them. Anywhere Harper claimed to hit notes above E5, that was me." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Donovan's gavel came down once sharp as a gunshot, and the room fell silent again. Melissa presented evidence, methodically, contracts showing Autumn paid between $2,000 and $5,000 per song, non-disclosure agreements, threatening financial destruction if she ever spoke publicly, recording session logs proving Autumn had recorded vocals for every major Harper Weston hit in the past 12 years, emails explicitly instructing studio staff that Autumn Hayes is never to be publicly credited under any circumstances. "Ms. Hayes, when you heard Marcus Brennan say that Harper Sterling couldn't sing that note, what did you think?" Autumn looked directly at Marcus for the first time. "I thought finally someone said it. Someone who didn't sign an NDA, who didn't have anything to lose, who just told the simple truth that everyone in the industry already knew but was too afraid to say out loud. And was he right? Yes, completely. Melissa sat down. Catherine Ross stood for cross-examination, but before she could speak, Judge Donovan raised her hand. I've heard enough. The judge turned directly to Harper Weston. Ms. Weston, I'm going to ask you one question. Although you're not formally on the stand, you are under oath right now in this courtroom, and I remind you that perjury carries serious consequences. Catherine shot to her feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is filing a $10 million lawsuit to silence truthful speech. Judge Donovan's tone left no room for argument. She looked at Harper with the kind of directness that stripped away every layer of performance and pretense. Can you sing the note at issue? Harper's face went pale. The courtroom held its breath. Every camera focused on her, every reporter's pen poised above their notebook. Your Honor, I fail to see how this is relevant to the motion. Highly relevant. You're asking this court to silence people who claim you cannot reach that note. Then prove them wrong. Sing it, right now. Absolute silence. Harper looked at her lawyers, looked at the judge, looked at Marcus sitting 20 feet away, watching her with an expression that wasn't triumph or anger, but something closer to pity. My voice hasn't been warmed up properly. You've performed on demand for 15 years, Ms. Weston. Surely you can demonstrate it once in a courtroom. Harper's mouth opened, then closed. No sound emerged except the faint whisper of air through the ventilation system. Just as I thought. Judge Donovan made another note. Then Harper did something no one expected. She stood slowly, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all its careful polish, all its practiced control. It came out raw and exhausted, and finally, after 12 years, honest. I can't sing the note. The courtroom exploded. Reporters typed frantically. Catherine grabbed Harper's arm, whispering urgently, but Harper pulled away. I haven't been able to sing it for 12 years. Not since the vocal hemorrhage. Harper's voice got stronger as she kept talking, as if confession was oxygen after years of suffocating. Everything Marcus Brennan said is true. I used Autumn's voice. I lied to audiences. I sold tickets to live performances and gave them playback. She looked directly at the cameras that the judge had allowed in the courtroom. You were right, and I'm sorry. Catherine was on her feet, red-faced. Ms. Weston, I strongly advise you to stop talking immediately. Harper turned to her lawyer with something like relief washing across her features. I'm done. I'm done lying. I'm done threatening people. I'm done. She looked at Marcus. You were right to tell the truth, and I was wrong to try to destroy you for it. Then Harper Weston walked out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyers scrambling, leaving the lawsuit in ruins. Leaving nothing but silence and the slow realization that something fundamental had just shifted in the world. Judge Donovan's gavel came down. The request for injunction is denied. Furthermore, the court sanctions the plaintiff for filing a frivolous action intended to silence truthful speech. The gavel struck again. Mr. Brennan, you are free to continue telling your story. That's called the First Amendment. It protects the truth even when the truth is inconvenient. The courtroom erupted in applause. Melissa gripped Marcus's shoulder hard enough to hurt. Ray had tears streaming down his face. Marcus just sat there trembling, unable to quite believe what had happened, that the battle he'd been preparing to fight for months had ended in a single morning with 5 words from the person he'd thought would never ever admit she was wrong. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Rachel Bennett from 60 Minutes pushed through the crowd. Marcus, how do you feel? Marcus took a breath, and when he spoke, the words came from somewhere deeper than strategy or revenge. I feel like I can finally breathe again. I feel like maybe telling the truth matters after all, even when it costs you everything to say it. That soundbite would play on every news network for the next week, would be quoted in think pieces about integrity and power, would become one of those phrases people remembered years later when they talked about this moment. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Lily lying in a hospital bed 6 miles away, waiting for surgery that was now just 3 days off. The legal battle was over, but the war that actually mattered, keeping his daughter alive, was about to begin. Within 24 hours of Harper's courtroom admission, her career collapsed with the speed of a controlled demolition. The 3 remaining sponsors pulled their contracts. The record label terminated her agreement and pulled her albums from streaming services pending recrediting. The Las Vegas residency, worth $50 million over 3 years, was canceled, the promoters citing material breach of contract. The Grammy committee announced a formal review of her awards, and within a week both trophies were officially revoked. The first time in the Academy's history they'd rescinded awards for fraud rather than personal conduct. But more important than Harper's fall was what rose in its place. Within 48 hours of the hearing, the GoFundMe for Lily's surgery exploded. Working people from across the country donated in waves: $10 from a waitress in Portland, $20 from a construction worker in Atlanta, $50 from a retired teacher in Milwaukee. By the end of the first day, 38,000. By the end of the second, 57,000. More than enough for the surgery, more than enough for recovery, more than enough to prove that when people with little decide to give what they have, they can move mountains. The messages that came with the donation said everything. You stood up for us when we had no voice. Working people take care of our own. This is what solidarity looks like. Marcus sat in Lily's hospital room the night before her surgery, reading the messages aloud to her. Because she'd asked to know who was helping, who cared enough to send money to a girl they'd never met. She listened with the kind of attention children bring to stories that teach them how the world works, and when he finished, she said something that Marcus would remember for the rest of his life. "Daddy, you didn't just save yourself. You saved all of them, too." She was 6 years old, and she understood what had taken Marcus weeks to fully grasp, that this fight had never been about just one janitor and one celebrity. It was about every person who'd ever been told to shut up and take it, every voice that had been stolen or silenced or sold, every truth that powerful people tried to bury because it was cheaper than changing. Surgery day arrived with the kind of clarity that comes from terror and love existing in the same space. Marcus was at the hospital before dawn, sitting in Lily's room while nurses prepped her for the operating room. Dr. Rachel Hayes came in at 6:30, still calm and professional, but with the gravity of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. "Open heart surgery," she explained, not for the first time, but Marcus needed to hear it again, needed to understand what his daughter was about to endure. 8 to 10 hours. We'll repair the ventricular septal defect, close the hole in her heart. The risks are real: infection, bleeding, arrhythmia, stroke. There's a 3 to 5% chance Lily doesn't survive the procedure. Marcus felt those odds like stones in his chest. 3 to 5%, 1 in 20 to 1 in 33. Lily could be that one. His daughter could die on that table while strangers tried to fix something that should have never been broken in the first place. And without the surgery, his voice came out barely louder than breathing. Dr. Hayes met his eyes with the kind of honesty that hurt but was necessary. Without the surgery, Lily won't see her 7th birthday, maybe not even her 6th and a half. Lily was awake, groggy from pre-medication, but aware enough to know something big was happening. "Daddy?" Her voice sounded small and far away. Marcus moved to her bedside, took her hand carefully around the IV line. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here." "I'm scared." The admission broke something in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm scared too. But you know what? You're the bravest person I know. You're going to do this, and when you wake up, your heart is going to be all fixed, and you're going to be able to run and play and do everything you've always wanted to do. Will you sing for me?" Marcus looked at the nurses who nodded their permission. So there in the pre-op room with medical equipment beeping and fluorescent lights humming overhead, Marcus sang, "You Are My Sunshine." Grace's favorite, the song that had gotten them through 5 years of grief and fear and nights when hope felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. The nurses stopped their preparations to listen. Other families in nearby rooms went quiet. When the song ended, Lily smiled a real smile, not forced, not brave, just his little girl feeling loved in a moment when she needed it most. "Your singing makes my heart feel better." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Then I'll keep singing. Forever." The nurses wheeled Lily toward the operating room. Marcus walked alongside the gurney until they reached the double doors where he couldn't follow. Lily looked back at him, and her eyes were Grace's eyes, and for a moment he could see his wife and his daughter's face, could feel Grace there with them, telling him it was going to be okay. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart. See you soon." The doors swung closed. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at white paint and small windows that showed nothing before Ray's hand on his shoulder guided him to the surgical waiting room. 8 hours. The longest 8 hours of Marcus Brennan's life. He couldn't sit still. Paced for the first hour. Sat for the second, hands clenched between his knees, praying to a God he wasn't sure he believed in, but was willing to beg anyway. Ray stayed beside him, saying nothing because there was nothing to say. His presence the only comfort available in a situation where comfort was impossible. Third hour, Melissa texted, "Harper's lawsuit officially withdrawn. You're free." Marcus barely registered it. Nothing mattered except what was happening behind those doors. Fourth hour, Marcus drifted into memories, the first time he'd held Lily, 3 pounds of determination, and Will wrapped in blankets, tubes everywhere. Doctors saying she might not make it through the night, but she did, she fought, she survived. Fifth hour. Updates stopped coming from the OR. Marcus's anxiety spiked. Ray gripped his shoulder. "No news is good news. If something was wrong, they'd tell us." Sixth hour. Marcus thought about Grace, about the choice he'd made 5 years ago to leave the stage and run to her hospital bed. Everyone had called it the wrong decision, career suicide, throwing away his one chance. But sitting here now, Marcus understood it was the only decision he could have lived with. Career meant nothing if the people you loved died alone. Seventh hour. Hospital chaplain stopped by, offered prayer. Marcus accepted, not because he thought it would change anything, but because in moments like this, you took whatever strength was offered from whatever source provided it. Eighth hour, Dr. Hayes appeared in the doorway, surgical mask pulled down, face exhausted but smiling. The surgery was successful. Marcus couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the words fast enough to believe them. Dr. Hayes continued, and her voice carried relief so profound it was almost visible. "We repaired the ventricular septal defect completely. Lily's heart is functioning normally. Strong rhythm, good pressure, no complications. She's in recovery now. Vitals are stable, and barring any unexpected issues, she's going to make a full recovery." Marcus broke. Sobbed openly. 5 years of fear and grief and desperate hope finally released in a flood he couldn't control and didn't try to. Ray embraced him, crying too, and Dr. Hayes stood there with professional composure, cracking just enough to show the human underneath who was genuinely happy for this father and his daughter. "She's going to be okay." Marcus needed to hear it again, needed it confirmed. "Your daughter is going to live a full, normal, healthy life." 3 hours later, Lily woke in the ICU recovery room. Groggy from anesthesia, breathing tube removed, chest bandaged, but vitals showing strong and steady. She saw Marcus sitting beside her bed and managed a smooth smile. "Daddy?" Marcus grabbed her hand, tears streaming down his face. I'm here, my love. You did it. You were so brave. Did you sing for me while I was sleeping? Do you want to hear it now? Your singing makes my heart feel better. So Marcus sang right there in the ICU recovery room. Somewhere over the rainbow, and his voice was still a little rusty from years of silence. But it was beautiful anyway, because it was real, because it was filled with love, because his daughter was alive and going to stay that way. Nurses stopped their rounds to listen. Other families peeked from nearby rooms. When the song ended, Lily's eyes were already closing again, drifting back to healing sleep, but she whispered, "That was perfect, Daddy." For the first time in 5 years, Marcus felt something shift in his chest, hope real and solid and unshakable. His voice had come back not for stages or money or fame, but for love. And that was the only thing that had ever mattered. While Lily recovered over the next 6 weeks, the world outside continued changing. California State Assembly passed Bill 2847, quickly nicknamed the Brennan Act, requiring full transparency for any live performance using pre-recorded vocals. Tickets had to clearly disclose the use of backing tracks, and violations were treated as consumer fraud with civil penalties up to $10,000 per incident. Within 18 months, 12 more states passed similar legislation. The Recording Academy overhauled its crediting rules. Every song submitted for award consideration had to fully disclose all contributing vocalists. The vague language of additional vocals was eliminated. Studio singers had to be credited by name or the song was ineligible for consideration. Spotify and Apple Music added mandatory credits tabs to every song. Studio singers who had been invisible for decades, hundreds of them, thousands of performances, voices that had created hits but never gotten recognition, finally had names attached to their work. A studio singers union formed with 2,000 members in its first year. They negotiated minimum rates of $10,000 per song, banned exploitative NDAs that silenced artists, and provided legal support for members fighting for proper credit and compensation. Autumn Hayes was elected the union's first president. Autumn herself saw her career explode from the shadows into the light. Her debut solo album, My Voice, went gold in 6 weeks, platinum by 3 months. She won a Grammy for Best New Artist despite being 35 and working professionally for 15 years. And in her acceptance speech, she said, "I was afraid for 15 years. A 32-year-old janitor showed me what courage really looks like. This award belongs to every studio musician, every session singer, every artist whose name was erased from their own work. We matter. Our voices matter." 5 major record labels approached Marcus with offers. He turned them all down. "I won't leave Lily, not now, not ever." Instead, he signed with Heartsong Records, a small independent label run by musicians who were also parents who understood that family came before career. Who built his contract around flexibility, no tours longer than 2 weeks. Lily could travel with him everywhere. Marcus retained full ownership of his compositions. 15% of all revenue from Marcus's music went to a fund he established, Unbreakable Voices, a scholarship program for young singers from working-class backgrounds. No exploitative contracts, no NDAs, no taking advantage of desperate talent. Just training, legal education, and real support for artists who wanted to make music without selling their souls. 50 scholarships in the first year, 200 by the third. Marcus recorded his debut album, Silent No More, in collaboration with Autumn Hayes. Songs about reclaiming courage, about speaking truth when the world demanded silence, about daring to say no when everyone expected you to accept whatever powerful people offered. The album went gold in 6 weeks. Music videos were filmed in the places where Marcus's voice had truly been born, East Nashville streets where he'd struggled, the Ryman Auditorium where everything changed. the hospital room where he'd sung to Lily while machines kept her alive. 18 months after the gala that changed everything, Marcus Brennan stood backstage at the Ryman Auditorium, heart-pounding, hands steady for the first time in years. This was his first major concert. The venue was sold out, 2,000 people, but not the wealthy patrons who'd filled it for Harper's charity gala. Working people who'd lined up early, who'd paid $20 to $50 for tickets because Marcus had insisted on prices that janitors and teachers and mechanics could actually afford. Lily sat in the front row now, 8 years old, healthy and radiant. The surgical scar on her chest had faded to a thin silver line barely visible beneath her t-shirt that read, "My dad's voice saved me," in letters she'd designed herself. Beside her sat Ray, retired now, but refusing to miss this moment. Marcus stopped by the custodial room before going on stage, a ritual he'd decided was important. The new head janitor was there, a woman in her mid-20s organizing supplies. "Mr. Brennan, it's an honor." Marcus shook her hand and his voice was genuine when he said, "Thank you for everything you do. This building doesn't run without you. Don't ever let anyone tell you different." She smiled. "We know. Thanks for reminding everyone else." Marcus walked onto the stage. The audience erupted, 2,000 people on their feet before he'd sung a single note. He stood at the microphone looking out at faces that reflected his own life, people who worked hard for little pay, who'd been told they didn't matter, who'd given $20 they couldn't afford to save a little girl they'd never met because they believed in something larger than themselves. "Thank you for being here." His voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the auditorium without strain. 18 months ago, I stood on this stage not as an artist, but as someone told he didn't belong. Someone told to stay quiet." He gestured to the theater around him. "But this room taught me something. Voices don't need permission to matter. They just need to be heard." The applause built again. Marcus opened with "Silent No More," and his voice wasn't technically perfect. There were still traces of 5 years away from training. But it was real, honest, filled with lived experience that no amount of coaching could manufacture. The audience didn't just listen. They testified with him, singing along to words they'd learned from his album, tears streaming down faces that understood this wasn't just entertainment, but vindication. For the second song, Marcus invited Autumn Hayes onto the stage. Together they sang "Higher Ground," and when they reached the final C6, both of them hit it clean and accurate and truly theirs. The note rang through the Ryman like a bell, declaring truth had won after all. The audience lost control, shouting and crying and holding on to each other because they were witnessing something that mattered beyond music, proof that ordinary people could stand up to power and survive. For the final song, Marcus called Lily onto the stage. "This is my daughter. 2 years ago, I almost lost her. In that fear, I found my voice again, not for fame, not for money, but for love." They sang "You Are My Sunshine" together, but this time with a reversal that showed how far they'd come. Lily took the lead vocal, her voice clear and pure and confident, while Marcus harmonized beneath her, supporting but not overwhelming. The cameras caught the Ryman's custodial staff standing in the wings, applauding with tears in their eyes. A sign appeared in the audience, "We always knew you could sing." Marcus looked out at the crowd, people who had been invisible, now visible, voices that had been silenced, now heard, and spoke his final words of the night. "To everyone who was ever told to stay quiet, to everyone whose name was erased, to everyone told they didn't matter." He paused, letting the words settle. "You are not invisible anymore. Your voice matters, and no one can ever take that from you." The curtain fell to applause that lasted 10 minutes. Marcus stood there holding Lily's hand, understanding finally that he hadn't just won a fight against one corrupt celebrity. He'd helped start something larger, a movement of working people. demanding to be seen, to be credited, to be valued for the work they did and the voices they possessed. Harper Weston tried a comeback tour 6 months after the scandal, but sold only 11% of tickets and canceled after 3 shows. She filed for bankruptcy a year later. The last anyone heard, she was teaching music business ethics online for a community college. A job that paid $40,000 a year and required her to confront the very system she'd helped perpetuate. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that studio singers finally had a union, that laws protected audiences from fraud, that young artists had scholarships that didn't exploit them, that working people had proven they could support one of their own when the system tried to crush him. 2 years after the Ryman concert, Marcus and Lily visited Grace's grave on a cold November morning. The cemetery was quiet, just fallen leaves and distant traffic and the weight of memory. Lily placed flowers on the headstone, her choice chrysanthemums, because she'd read they meant loyalty and devotion. "Daddy, do you think Mom would be proud?" Marcus knelt beside his daughter. "I know she would be." "How do you know?" "Because I'm proud of you. And she loved you even more than I do, which I didn't think was possible." Lily smiled, then got serious in the way children do when they've been thinking about something important. "Do you still miss her?" "Every day." "Me too. But I think—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "I think she's why we're okay. Because she taught you to be brave and you taught me." Marcus looked at his daughter, at this small person who'd survived a heart defect and open-heart surgery and the public spectacle of her father's fight for truth, and realized she understood something profound. Grace's love hadn't ended when she died. It had transformed, passed through him to Lily, creating a chain of courage that would outlive them all. "So her love is still here," Lily continued. "Just different." Marcus's eyes filled. "You're exactly right. That's exactly right." They sat in silence for a while, father and daughter, beside a grave that held the woman they both loved. Both missed, both carried forward in everything they did. Finally, Lily asked, "Daddy, will you sing for Mom?" So Marcus sang "You Are My Sunshine" one more time there in the cemetery, with bare trees overhead and cold ground beneath them. His voice was strong now, fully healed, no longer singing from pain but from peace. The song wasn't about grief anymore. It was about gratitude for Grace, for Lily, for every person who'd stood with them when standing alone would have meant destruction. When the song ended, Lily leaned against him. "That was beautiful, Daddy. Thank you, sweetheart." They walked back to the car, hand in hand, leaving flowers on Grace's grave and carrying her memory forward into a future she'd made possible by teaching Marcus that some things mattered more than success, more than money, more than any dream that required you to abandon the people you loved. Marcus's phone buzzed, a text from Melissa. "Just got confirmation the Brennan Act passed in Texas. That's 15 states now." 15 states where audiences would know the truth. 15 states where artists would get credit. 15 states where the law protected truth-tellers instead of punishing them. It wasn't everything, but it was something, proof that one person's courage could ripple outward, changing systems that had seemed immovable, giving voice to thousands who'd been silent too long. Marcus looked at Lily, at this girl who'd survived when survival seemed impossible, and understood finally what Grace had been trying to tell him 5 years ago, when she'd said she was proud he'd chosen family over career. She'd been saying that love, real, sacrificial, unconditional love, was the only success that mattered. Everything else was just noise. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Ready." They drove back through Nashville's streets, past the Ryman where Marcus worked and performed, past the hospital where Lily had been saved, past neighborhoods where working people lived and worked and raised families and dreamed dreams that mattered every bit as much as any celebrity's ambition. The city looked different now. Or maybe Marcus just saw it differently. Saw the beauty in ordinary lives, the dignity in hard work, the power in voices that refused to stay silent. His phone rang. Unknown number, but he answered anyway. "Mr. Brennan, this is John Legend's office. Mr. Legend would like to discuss collaborating on a project supporting music education in underserved communities." Marcus smiled. The offers kept coming: collaborations, performances, opportunities that 2 years ago would have seemed impossible. But he'd learned to be selective, to only accept projects that aligned with his values, that didn't require him to become someone he wasn't. "I'd be happy to discuss it, but I'll need to know the timeline. I don't do tours longer than 2 weeks, and my daughter comes with me everywhere." Of course, Mr. Legend completely understands. He's a father, too. They scheduled a call for next week. Marcus hung up and glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window, humming "You Are My Sunshine" softly to herself, and Marcus realized this was what victory actually looked like: not fame or fortune or revenge against enemies, but a healthy daughter humming her mother's favorite song while driving through a city that had tried to break them but failed. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus stood in their small apartment, looking at the walls that held photographs of Grace of Lily at various ages of the two of them together at the Ryman concert. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from the stage of Voice of Tomorrow, to hospital waiting rooms, to cleaning floors, to that moment on stage when he'd chosen truth over safety. People asked him sometimes if he regretted it, if the cost had been too high, if he wished he'd just stayed swoon and avoided the entire battle. The answer was always the same: no, because staying silent would have taught Lily that truth was negotiable, that integrity had a price, that powerful people could buy your voice if they offered enough money. And that lesson, that poisonous lesson, was worth any amount of suffering to avoid passing down to his daughter. Marcus's phone lit up with a final notification before bed. The GoFundMe that had saved Lily's life had closed at $63,000, $8,000 more than needed. After paying for surgery and recovery, Marcus had donated the remainder to St. Jude Children's Hospital with one instruction: use it to help families who couldn't afford the care their children needed. The families for whom $8,000 meant the difference between life and death. He turned off the lights and went to check on Lily one last time before bed. She was sleeping peacefully, chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a heart that worked perfectly now. A heart that had been broken but was fixed, that had been weak but was strong, that beat with the same courage her mother had possessed and her father had finally learned to claim. Marcus whispered into the darkness, "We made it, Grace, we actually made it." And somewhere in the silence that followed, he could almost hear her voice answering back, proud, loving, eternal, "I never doubted you would."